Okay, so I'm really excited, and obviously I'm dressed all Halloweeny. I'm getting my vibe on because I've just created something called a Smellcaster. This is something I've been working on for a little while, and it's been bubbling away in my head for quite some time. Now, the whole idea with this magical cave is that it's going to be an immersive environment. It's going to be my Wonderland, my Disneyland, my escape from reality. So what I'm trying to do is to create my own world in here, and the best way of doing that is to be fully immersive. Now, I've created videos about my lighting effects, linked up here. I've also done videos about furniture, decorations, sound effects, smart home videos like the talking skull that tackles sound, but I've never really done anything that tackles the sense of smell yet. I mean, I've done the fireplace that does smell of chocolate, and that one's linked up here. It kind of links into that a little bit. So I thought I'd create a smell blaster, similar to what they use in Disneyland. So I'm going to Disneyland in a couple of weeks, and what I'm thinking is I can use that as inspiration, but in the meantime I've gone ahead and bought a compressor, bought some air tubing, bought a whole load of stuff to see whether or not this is going to work. And aside from the explosion last night, and I will get onto that in just a moment, everything does work. Okay, so I'm going to use the man cave to not only play Dungeons and Dragons, but also to experience a bit of escapism. So sometimes I'll ask Ferdinand for a story, and what I want to happen is he will weave in all of these different elements that utilize a markup language that I've written. Don't run away, it's not all technical, I promise. This markup language is essentially a way of linking in with a large language model like ChatGPT. I'm not going to explain in this video how I'm going to do that. That's for another video a bit later on. But the first stage is to get the smells working, and I'm just going to try to work out a way of triggering different smells at different times. Now, you might want to look up here. I've explained in a previous video that this is my magic mirror, and underneath that there is a Smellcaster outlet. That's just me planning ahead, because what I want to do is to blast smells out of this grate over here. If we zoom into that grate, it says spirare veritas, which means the breath of truth, or to breathe the truth. The translation isn't literal, it's from Latin, but what it means is this is how I'm going to get the smells into the man cave. This is the outlet for the Smellcaster. The Smellcaster is essentially going to be the thing that gives the ambience within the man cave. So when the story talks about going into a library, it's going to blast out the smell of old books, or a bakery is going to blast out the smell of freshly baked bread, or leather armchairs, or rain, or goodness knows what. There's going to be a whole bunch of different things. So far I've got black cherry, I've got pumpkin spice, I'm going to get Christmas cookies, which is going to be all cinnamony. There's going to be different smells for different occasions and different story lines. Now, to do that, I thought I would need some sort of puff mechanism, and obviously I'm going to need a compressor for that. The way that this is now going to work is that once I build up the pressure in the compressed air line, it's going to pressurize the whole system. So the pressurized line comes out of the compressor into a main line, which then goes into a manifold. Don't run away, this isn't going to get too engineering, I promise. The manifold is basically like an exchange, or like a multi-switch system. The manifold itself is going to hold pressure, and it's going to have lots of little outlets. Each of those outlets go to its own line. So let's deal with one line at a time. And then we can just multiply that line multiple times for essentially the same thing. Each line out goes into a solenoid. That solenoid is basically like a switch, and we turn it on and off to turn the air on and off. And I'll get to that in just a minute. So each solenoid line out will then go into another line, which then goes to an adapter, which goes to an inline filter. Now typically this will be to filter out debris from the line, but we don't really have any to worry about. So what it actually does in my system will be to hold a cotton wool bud soaked in fragrance oil. That oil will have different scents in it, like pumpkin spice or black cherry or peppermint or rain or those sorts of things. That line out then goes into a check valve, and the check valve is really important because it prevents all of the smells that are already hanging about afterwards, and I'll get to that in a second, to go back into the smell pod. You don't want that happening because otherwise it'll start muddying the smell. So you want to keep those smells pure and totally isolated. So when the pressure then goes through that system and it breaks the check valve, that then opens the gate. I say break, it doesn't break it as in like snap it, it literally just opens the gate and then it closes it again based on pressure. That then goes into a central mixing manifold, and that manifold again is a bit like a exchange system where it's just like a bulk of stuff, which then has a line out. The reason that I want that exchange manifold in there is so that we can mix different smells at different times if we need to. We probably won't most of the time. They're probably just going to be a pure smell, but I wanted that ability just in case we do. We also have a flush line which goes into the same manifold, which then flushes everything with clean air to make sure that no smells are hanging about, because otherwise if you then open it, it could potentially be muddy, or if it's just hanging about inside that manifold, even if it is pure when it comes into the manifold, it will muddy as soon as it comes into it, and then when it goes out, it will smell muddy anyway. So we need to flush it. So going back a little bit into the solenoid, that's going to require some power. That power is provided by a 24-volt adapter. And rather than that power going straight into the solenoid, we need to be able to control that. And that's where the MOSFET board comes in. Now, a MOSFET board is essentially like a relay. It turns it on and off. So each solenoid will have a MOSFET board, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So the MOSFET board powers each solenoid, but it also has power going into it as well. So a 24-volt adapter goes into the MOSFET board. The MOSFET board then goes out to the solenoid. How do you then turn it on and off? Well, that's when you get the Raspberry Pi involved. It doesn't look like this, it looks like this instead. So it's basically a tiny little computer, and those pins on it, I'm going to show it with an arrow. Those pins are a GPIO, or general purpose in and out interface. So each of those pins on the computer is addressable, which means that the Pi knows which pins to turn on and off. And those are the things that you then use to trigger the MOSFET board. So I'm not going to get too techie into all of that unless you want me to, in which case, please let me know down in the comments. But the MOSFET board itself turns the solenoids on and off. What's really neat about that is because the Pi is able to be networked and connected to my Home Assistant server, I can start doing some really cool stuff, such as I can use my doorbell, which is currently linked to my Home Assistant server, so that it loads up images on my TV of the doorbell feed so that I know who's there. But because it's also linked into Home Assistant, I can press the button on my doorbell, and yes, it does all the other stuff that it's already doing, but it can also fire a trigger to the Pi that controls the smell casting machine, and it can blast out a smell. Or, and this is what I'm going to be using it for, it can blast the clean air. Now, the clean air is basically to flush the line, but what it can also do is to ring a doorbell. How does it do that? Well, it blasts air at a wind chime, which I've just ordered on Amazon, and what it'll do is to blast through a nozzle at the wind chime, so that when someone presses the doorbell, the wind chime goes off in the man cave. So I know that there's someone at the door. It will then, if I'm watching TV, load up the feed on my TV at the same time. Yeah, I've changed it to dramatic lighting. Let me know if you like it. But I've done that for a reason, and it's because I'm going to talk about the explosion, which I'd actually forgotten to film the first time round. And I'm going to explain how that happened, so I am going to have to talk about safety. Please be careful if you're going to be doing this, and don't do what I did. Ordinarily, I would use something like this. This is pneumatic tubing, and this can handle a decent amount of pressure. Full pressure from my compressor is 6 bar, and this can handle it no problem. In fact, I think it can go up to bursts of 30 bar, but I'm never going to need that. The other thing is that this is a push fit fitting, which I use to put this pneumatic tubing in. It clicks, and then you can't pull it out without pulling on that. So you push that down, it comes out. Okay, cool. So that's the way that I connect most of my fittings. And before the solenoid, that's how I have to do it to make sure that it's all up to pressure and it can handle 6 bar pressure without exploding. So the explosion last night, how did it happen? Well, after the solenoid, because it's got a clear path out into the room through the filter and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't need to handle a massive amount of pressure, and it's also not going to be for a very prolonged period of time. So it probably would have been able to handle this. This is aquarium tubing. It's a lot softer, and it goes onto the barb fitting, which is the other end of this thing, and it goes on like that, and then it gets clamped on, and everything's all cushy and lovely. The only problem with that is that this stuff is very flexible, and it really shouldn't be able to hold 6 bar, and ordinarily it wouldn't, but last night I was probably a bit tired, not really thinking things through. I clamped the end there, I clamped the end on the other end by the inline filter, and then I took the whole thing up to 6 bar pressure to see whether or not there were any leaks. That was a big mistake, because this stuff can't handle 6 bar pressure. It ballooned, it exploded. It was very loud and did actually deafen me for a couple of minutes, so I think I've probably done some sort of damage to my hearing. Probably not a good thing, and it still actually kind of hurts. So please be careful if you're going to be doing this sort of stuff, and do what I've done now, not last night, now, and order some pressure fittings that will handle 6 bar pressure for the whole thing. Of course, you can down regulate using a proper regulator, and maybe that's what I should have done, but I want 6 bar pressure throughout the whole thing. Aquarium tubing is not going to do it, so that one's going to go into my box for another project. Watch this space. This is becoming incredibly more complicated than I thought it was going to be, but also infinitely cooler, because if people press the doorbell, it rings a set of ghost bells that ring in my man cave. How cool is that? So yeah, I know I'm giving off mad inventor vibes, probably my white hair, but also maybe my combo that I'm wearing today. But if you do like this sort of thing, click that like button, subscribe and ding that bell, because all of this stuff is going to get even madder. Now that the man cave is pretty much complete, phase 2 is utterly bonkers. It's full 4D cinema and you're not going to want to miss any of it. So please click like, subscribe and ding that bell, and I'm going to be back next time with some more magical awesomeness. But until next time, as always,
Very magical.
do you like this lighting? Let me know.